Hello, it's Patrick Ussher here, and in this video I'm going to try to answer the question, is ME-CFS just a hypersensitive nervous system issue? Now, this idea is sort of chucked around a lot in the YouTube sphere. It's particularly talked about by people who have programs, brain retraining programs for patients with ME-CFS and related illnesses. And the basic idea that is suggested is that ME-CFS is only a nervous system dysregulation or issue. That's to say that the flight-fight-freeze response, the excessive nervous system sensitization, things like light sensitivity, noise sensitivity, smell sensitivity, these things are the only aspects that are going wrong in ME-CFS, and there is nothing else biomedically going wrong in the body. And so if you just rewire your brain, you reset the stress response, you will be all good to go and you will wonderfully recover. And so as I say, this idea is actually put around quite a lot. And, it sounds great. I mean, who wouldn't want to have an illness where the answer is as simple as that? But the main issue with it really is that it's total bullshit. So I'm going to be talking today about that. And I think it's really important to counteract this idea because actually, although there is a nervous system component to ME-CFS, absolutely, and one that I believe responds to neuroplasticity in many cases, it's absolutely not the only thing that's going on. And there are many things going on in the body that have been identified in the research and that it's really important to actually know about. Otherwise, you're getting completely the wrong end of the stick. And in a situation where you could be actually severely ill, it's very dangerous not to have the big picture, not to understand more fully what it is you're actually going through. And before getting into what I think are the main issues with this, I just want to say that I think some people who kind of push this line are at least somewhat well-intentioned. And I say somewhat well-intentioned rather than well-intentioned because it wouldn't take more than reading some of the latest research or main research into ME-CFS for about 10 or 15 minutes to actually know that you could never possibly claim that the illness is just a nervous system problem. And so I say these people are somewhat well-intentioned because there is simply, it shows, if they're saying that, it shows that they don't have any respect whatsoever for the painstaking research that scientists are actually doing to uncover the biomedical problems within this illness. And so if someone says that, I think there is someone who is not giving the respect that the research actually deserves. And then at the other end, you have people who I would say are not well-intentioned at all. And in particular, there are people out there, and some of you may be well aware or know very well who it is I'm talking about when I say this. But for example, there's one person who says this over and over, that ME-CFS is just a hypersensitive nervous system issue. And at the same time, he wants you to buy his program, which he charges $6,000 for as his brain retraining program. And he's also been found in an interview on a different channel to say that his aim is this year, or maybe it was last year actually, to make $1 million out of his program. So, there are some really real issues with people who push this line. Let's now talk about what are the actual main problems with this kind of argument. Well, the first thing is it's just plain untrue. There's about, last time I checked on PubMed, there's about 9.5, maybe close to 10,000 research papers on ME-CFS at this point, and of course there are loads now on Long Covid, which is essentially the same thing. And there are countless biomedical abnormalities that have been found, and if you were to talk about all of them, you could talk about it for a week. I mean, there's so many things that have been found. And here I'm simply going to talk about 3 main biomedical problems that really contribute to ME-CFS in a kind of give a major burden to the illness. The first of these is microclotting. So the idea here is that there are these small, microscopic clots that are filling up the blood of patients with ME-CFS. They are actually caused by the pathophysiology of the illness itself. So the general inflammatory state of the illness upregulates the clotting pathways, creates the microclotting. And so these tiny clots start to fill up the blood. They actually condense the blood and they make it very sluggish. And so you get poor circulation. And because the blood is getting very thick, it's not getting into areas of what are known as the microcirculation. So areas that, are part of the blood vessels that are absolutely tiny and would normally require sort of, shall we say, lighter blood for the blood to easily get into them. So because the blood has become very thick, it can't quite do that. So you have this problem in the microcirculation. All these clots are kind of interfering with the transfer of oxygen from the bloodstream into the muscles. And so you get this phenomenon actually creates, it's one of the contributing factors to the exercise intolerance and the creation of post-exertional malaise. So you actually, because you're not getting the oxygen transfer into the muscles give up more quickly when you try to exercise. So, this is a very distinct biomedical problem in ME-CFS that is contributing to the symptoms. If people aren't aware of this, the best research is being done by Professor Ricia Pretorius. She's from South Africa, and I will include a link to her paper below and her name so you can look her up. But the paper I'm thinking of in particular is called The Occurrence of Hyperactivated Platelets and Fibrinolytic Microclots in Myalgic Encephalomyelitis/Chronic Fatigue Syndrome. And these clots will actually, talk about giving a really evident sign of a biomedical problem. These clots actually darken the blood, right? Because anything that condenses or becomes thicker becomes darker in color. So I'm just going to show you a picture here of the blood of an ME-CFS patient with, a huge amount of microclotting in this case, so much so that the blood has actually become black, right? So this is a really evident example of a biomedical issue, and it should not be left out. Second example to talk about, very important, extremely characteristic of ME-CFS, low blood volume, not having enough blood, right? This doesn't affect everyone, but it affects an awful lot of patients, and some researchers would consider it a central phenomenon of the illness and the reasons why it develops as being central to the nature of the illness as well. And I hope to have a whole series of videos talking about why low blood volume comes about and how you can improve it. And a paper about 6 years ago by a Dutch team, Frans Visser and Linda van Kampen, actually took ME-CFS patients and measured how much blood they had. It's quite a complex procedure. It's not something you can just do a blood test for. It requires special machines and blah, 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 and things that are quite tricky to do. And what they found, and the paper in question is called Low Blood Volume in Chronic Fatigue Syndrome Relation to Complaints, again linked down below. And what they found is that all of the patients they studied had a reduction in blood volume, basically. Some of them less than others. But amongst ME-CFS patients who were housebound, the blood volume reduction was actually, the mean total blood volume reduction was 22%. So that means that if someone has, a healthy person has 5 litres of blood, these people were slightly under 4 litres. And the worst affected patient in the study only had 3.5 litres of blood, so they had 1.5 litres less than the physiological norm. Now, if you're a healthy person and you just happen to have some kind of catastrophic accident and you lose 1.5 litres of blood straight away, you are severely ill and you need to be in hospital to save your life. So in this case, you actually have ME-CFS patients struggling in their day-to-day with over a litre less blood. And this, of course, creates a lot of the symptoms of ME-CFS because, you're not getting enough blood into your muscles. So you're again, they tire very easily. Your heart doesn't have enough blood to work with. It's not able to fill up with enough blood. And then, of course, not able to pump out enough blood. Your brain doesn't have enough blood to work with. So you get all the cognitive issues, the brain fog, lack of concentration, feeling like you have early onset Alzheimer's, all these things because you're not getting the blood into your brain. And we also know, I should say, that this study showed it I just mentioned, but another one back in 2010 by a guy called Hurwitz, again, I'll link it down below, also showed that the more severely ill you are, the less blood you have. So this is so important to know. And again, it's such a dramatic example of a biomedical issue. And when I see these people saying, it's just a hypersensitive nervous system issue, and then I see people in the comments saying things like, oh, thank God, thank God, I'm so relieved to know there's nothing wrong in my body because I feel like I'm dying. I'm just tears of joy coming down my face because I know there's nothing wrong with me, really. I get really annoyed at people who are saying this stuff, right? Really, really annoyed. It's very irresponsible and it's dangerous because someone who's very severe could be watching that and they're being told there's nothing actually wrong with them. And at the same time, in truth, they're 1.5 litres less blood than they should actually have. So that's actually very, very wrong for people to be saying these things. Third example, autoimmunity. So very, very briefly, I'd love to do many more videos on autoimmunity in ME-CFS and POTS, but there's a specific kind of autoimmune problem, to cut a very long story short, which has been identified as very common in ME-CFS and POTS patients. And this in particular comes from the research of Professor Carmen Scheibenbogen at Charité University Berlin. Her paper, which I love this paper, a unifying hypothesis of the pathophysiology of myalgic encephalomyelitis, observations from the findings of autoantibodies against beta-2 adrenergic receptors. Now, these autoantibodies, these autoimmune markers, actually, there are various ones, but they essentially live in the blood vessels, in the muscles and the brain, and they prevent them from vasodilating normally and allowing blood to perfuse into the muscles. And this also contributes to the exercise intolerance, because if your muscles can't be perfused with blood when you need to exercise, well, there's another reason why they're going to give up very quickly. So I'm just going to say that much about the autoimmunity for today. But these three examples that I wanted to highlight for people, they're all so obvious, such obvious biomedical problems that it literally beggars belief to me how someone can have the gumption to get up and just ignore all of this research, or not even be bothered to go and read it in the first place, and actually say that ME-CFS is just a hypersensitive nervous system issue. And the other thing I think it's really important to mention is that the people who push the narrative that it's only a nervous system issue also ignore the fact that all of these kinds of things I've just described, the low blood volume, the microclotting, the autoimmune problems, they also, once they're established, feed right back into the nervous system issues. They also freak out the brain. Let me give you a very obvious example. Your brain, in order to actually function, or in order for your brain to be happy, it needs to have a steady supply of blood and oxygen. If you don't have enough blood in your body in the first place, or you have these microclots that are interfering with oxygenation, your brain is going to freak out. It's going to be very stressed. And so actually, you have a situation where, yes, the nervous system is in this hypersensitive state, but also you have this the situation in the body in general is also impacting brain function and leading it to be stressed out as well. So it's really a whole cycle. It's not just top down. It's going in every way, every direction. Let me briefly mention a few other problems with this narrative. Firstly, it's highly disrespectful of the painstaking research that people are doing into trying to uncover why people are actually suffering with these illnesses. There are people at Harvard, Stanford, universities all around the world who are fighting to understand why people are so severely ill. And to just come along and completely be uninterested in that work is highly disrespectful. Second thing is, when you push this narrative, whether you realize it or not, you're actually tying in with some very dangerous ideas that have been perpetrated or perpetuated about ME-CFS over a long period of time. And those ideas are, of course, that actually there is nothing wrong with ME-CFS patients. It's all in their head. They just are lazy. They've become deconditioned. They need to get up off the sofa and take some exercise and do some CBT while they're about it. Well, why not? So this actual model, this narrative, ties in with what's called the biopsychosocial model of ME-CFS, which the biomedical research has disproved beyond doubt. But it's been very hard for health systems and governments to catch up with the biomedical reality of ME-CFS. And many of them still adopt this biopsychosocial model. So by saying, oh, it's just a nervous system issue, there's nothing else going on, you just need to rewire your brain, rewire your thinking patterns, stop being so afraid of exercise, you're actually feeding into that narrative. It's slightly different because you are saying there is a actual maladaptive hardwired stress response. That's a little different, but it's very closely aligned with it, really, if you strip it all down. And that's a real problem, not just because it's untrue, but because that narrative has done enormous damage to ME-CFS patients over the years. It also just doesn't really make much sense. There are plenty of people in the world who have nervous systems that are actually very dysregulated. They are very anxious. They've got PTSD, generalized anxiety disorder. They're nervous from dawn until dusk. And those people don't have ME-CFS. So someone could be anxious 24/7, but they don't have exercise intolerance. And you could have someone with ME-CFS who's actually much calmer than the person with anxiety, and yet if they do too much physically, they become very ill. So it doesn't really make much sense. Also as a narrative, it ignores the potential severity of ME-CFS. How can a nervous system dysfunction explain why going for a walk slightly, a few minutes longer than you should, leaves you in bed for 2 or 3 days, hardly able to, lift up a jug of water or get to the bathroom or turn over from side to side? It doesn't really explain that. It's not a robust, physiological explanation for that phenomenon. Whereas things like microclotting, the autoantibodies, low blood volume, these are very robust explanations for why someone's anaerobic threshold might actually be lowered so that when they go and exercise, they can't. And then they have this severe reaction because the body is not in a place to recover in any normal way from that exercise. And so that's really all I wanted to say about that. This is not to say that the nervous system dysfunction might not be the cause of these kinds of illnesses. It could well be. It's not to say that rewiring the brain mightn't help someone recover or help someone improve a lot. But what it is to say is that to state that this is all these illnesses are is dangerous. It's not acceptable. And it's a narrative that feeds into a long history of bullshit in relation to ME-CFS. And what I want to say also as a final note, if someone is severely ill with these illnesses, let's say they are someone with 30% less blood, they're at the more severe end of low blood volume. Let's say their blood is hugely microclotted, very thick. They're not getting the blood in their brain, not getting the blood into their skin, their muscles. They have these autoantibodies, in their blood vessels, in their heart, all these things. And they are desperate to get better. And they find someone who says your only problem is your hypersensitive nervous system. And that person is going to charge them $6,000 for the privilege of hearing more of the same. What do you call that? I'm not going to answer that question. You can answer that question. I have my own ideas about what that is. but at the very least, it's extremely unimpressive. So that's all I have to say for today. This is a theme I want to explore more. I hope you found the video interesting. Do share your thoughts on this below, and I look forward to interacting with you in the comments. And until next time, bye for now.